Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be talking about Egypt's foreign relations file. This is in light of Russia actually hoping Egypt would join the talks that will be held in Astana regarding the Syria conflict. Subsequently, maybe Saudi Arabia would also join the talks along with Qatar, Jordan and Iraq. We're going to be talking about this file here tonight, and joining us to shed more light on this issue is Mr. Sharif Al-Helwa, the political analyst. Mr. Helwa, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, before we start our talk, let's check out this report regarding Russia hoping Egypt would join the Astana talks, and we'll be right back.
Egypt has welcomed a ceasefire agreement between Syria's government and the country's mainstream rebel groups, which went into effect in the war-ravaged country, as Moscow expressed hope that Cairo will join talks in Astana later this month. In a statement following a meeting with the Syrian opposition leader Ahmed al-Jarba, the foreign ministry said it is of a critical importance that the Syrian forces develop a common vision to resolve the country's crisis and begin serious talks about the future of Syria. The truce was brokered by both Russia and Turkey, who support opposing sides in the war. It took effect at midnight on Thursday. There is a potential breakthrough in the 6-year civil war that has left more than 250,000 people dead and triggered a refugee crisis across Europe. Russian President Vladimir Putin says that if the truce holds, it will be followed by peace talks next month in Kazakhstan between Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government and opposition groups. Syria's foreign minister has welcomed the ceasefire agreement and said there is a real chance for a political settlement, and said the Syrian government will attend peace talks in the Kazakh capital Astana with an open mind, but suggested it would not be willing to compromise on the fate of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian top diplomat said everything is negotiable except national sovereignty and the people's right to choose its leadership, lashing out at Turkey and calling it an aggressive country and an occupier of parts of the Syrian territories. He said Turkey was not mentioned in any of the documents that were signed, adding that Turkey was not a partner and Damascus did not negotiate with, committed to implementing the ceasefire agreement and prepared to join the peace talks with the opposition rebels that will follow the deal. Turkey says the US-backed Syrian Kurdish militia will not take part in the peace talks that could take place in a nationwide Syrian ceasefire agreement succeeds.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off our discussion right away. Now, Mr. Al-Helwa, first off, Egypt has been doing a lot within its efforts within the presidency and the government, trying to re-establish itself as a leading player with a major role within the region. So far, over the past 2-3 years, how do you rate Egypt's stance as a major player within the region?
Egypt has always been a major player, and they will continue to be. As a lot of politicians call Egypt the heart of the Middle East. So when it comes to decision making in regards to all the problems in Syria, Libya, Yemen, Egypt has to have a hand in these situations. As I see it, it's developing. They're moving slowly but surely, and they are positioning themselves to be neutral in most situations without taking any sides, in order to have the last word, the controlling word at the end.
Well, a lot of people are really describing Egypt's foreign policy as Egypt being a friend with everyone, not really having any major enemies or any major conflicts with any other state. How long do you think Egypt can sustain that with all the good relationship with all the different countries, whether Russia or China or Saudi Arabia or the States, even though some of these countries might have a conflict of interest and political differences among themselves. How far do you think Egypt will sustain this friendly nature of its relationship? Do you think it can actually be dragged into any sort of conflict within these countries and themselves?
Well, I see that a lot of countries try to drag Egypt into some of its conflicts, but Egypt has been wise enough not to get involved completely. Over the short period of time after New Year, we just saw that Egypt have changed positions, not being too involved in the Palestinian situation, not being too involved in the Libyan situation. They have been brokering the deal with the Syrians and with the Turks and the Russians and Americans. So, and also the international politics globally has changed, really. There's more a wave towards unification among nations. The Cold War era has ended, really, and now it's time for global forces to unite, trying to stabilize the globe.
Well, before we actually talk about Egypt participating within the Syrian conflict, now, a lot of countries have actually stepped up their game, and they actually are starting to claim a very influential role within a conflict in Syria or the Palestinian-Israeli situation. Countries such as Russia, countries such as Turkey, even countries such as Iran. Now, these countries have big roles to play within these conflicts. Now, Egypt is trying to get in there by the invitation of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, do you feel that Egypt's word or Egypt's say regarding this situation or these crises, do you feel that it has still the final word, or do you think players who have been there for a while within these conflicts, such as Russia or Turkey, have a bigger say?
Well, Egypt will be always invited because it's a regional power. I mean, we're comparing now Egypt to Algeria, to Iran, to Turkey. We have the same weight as them. So they are waiting for us to have a say. They're waiting for us to make a conclusion about these international conflicts. So I mean, I'm not part of the Egyptian administration, but any decision the administration takes will be welcomed because it will solve resolving these conflicts.
Well, why do you think it took that much of a time to actually invite Egypt for such talks? Is it because it was Egypt's choice not to directly be involved within the Syrian crisis and just wait for things to settle down? Maybe a ceasefire would be in place, maybe the government forces would really claim the majority of Aleppo. Do you feel that it is Egypt's choice, or maybe the other players wanted to do the biggest part of the work on their own, and then when everything settled down more or less, now we can invite more countries into the equation?
Well, I'm not sure if it was Egypt's decisions or the global forces' decisions to make Egypt wait till the last moment. The situation is very murky, unclear, so Egypt, if I am Egypt, I would wait until I make the right moves. Wars are designed not in a single step. It's like a chess game. You have to prepare and move piece by piece until you reach a clearer vision of how the situation is.
And how do you see Egypt's stance when it does join the Syria talks in Astana, the Kazakh capital? How do you think it would stand regarding solving the Syrian crisis? Would it be on the government forces' side? Do you think it would support the opposition? Do you think Egypt would support Assad being a president still? Do you think they would agree to an agreement where Assad has to leave at some point?
There has been talks that I've been reading about that Assad will be invited for the new coming elections. He will be part of the elections, a democratic situation there. We have to understand the opposition has changed faces a lot, from being the rebels in Syria to the faces of the Muslim Brothers to the faces of radical Islam, and now they're trying to end this political Islamic situation. There is an international agreement to end political Islam globally. I mean, So it depends who the opposition now. Who are they? If they are representative of the political Islam, I don't think anybody is going to cooperate with them.
Mm-hmm. And now do you feel that the opposition is in a strong position to actually walk into these negotiations, or do you think that they were probably in a much stronger situation even before the government forces advance on Aleppo?
In my opinion, they are very weak.
Mm-hmm.
Assad forces have been very stable, moving and gaining concessions all over Syria. So they have a better chance being represented politically in Syria.
Yes. What about the extremist groups that are in Syria? That is one of the issues, as well as something that always Turkey thinks about and really prompts Turkey's involvement within this issue. Do you feel that Turkey would actually have an opposing idea to how Egypt or Russia would actually see to resolve this crisis?
Well, Turkey doesn't want extremist groups to be transferred into their territories.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, they've been pushing them inside Syria. They've been fighting them on the borders, trying to stop them from gaining concessions inside Syria. But lately, there have been a lot of bombings inside Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And this have made Turkey change its mind about why don't we get involved? Why don't we negotiate with the Russians? Maybe our position was wrong at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So things are moving and it's very fluid. So I think Turkey have a say inside Syria now to end extremist groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've mentioned Turkey and Russia now. Their relationship with each other has been on an ups and downs. The relationship was for a while quite tense after the plane crash, the fighter jet that actually crashed in Turkey. Now, all of a sudden, Turkey made some sort of a U-turn within its relationship, and they normalized relationships with Russia as well. And now Russia is leading these talks and leading these the sit-down with all the countries that will be participating, trying to solve the Syrian crisis. How do you explain this turnaround within the Russian-Turkish relations?
Well, Turkey and Russia have been historically very good allies.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they had periods of cold water, but right now the situation requires unity with even your opponents.
Mm-hmm.
So they just changed the scene and decided to let bygones be bygones, forget about the conflict they had with the Russians, and let's move forward, because there's economic ties as well. You got gas pipelines coming through, you got economic trade.
Mm-hmm.
I think even Iran and Turkey are very good allies economically. I read Turkey and Iran are exchanging lemon worth $150 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Just lemon.
Yes.
So,
well, we will be talking definitely about Iran later on. Now, do you feel that Turkey has it in its best interest for the government forces, the government authority, would actually prevail in such talks in Syria? Or do you think that they would still like to see, even if it's the government forces taking over, or really taking charge, they would still like to see Assad moving out?
The original talk, they wanted him out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the situation has changed, and he managed to stay in power. And now this is the guy we're going to be dealing with. This is how the Russians are thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, President Bashar al-Assad actually mentioned that for these talks, he would not... really, it's not about him leaving or staying, but he would still assume office until they actually form some sort of a referendum, if they need to change the constitution, if they need to hold presidential elections, and then the people would choose their leader, whether if it is Bashar al-Assad or not. Do you feel that this is the right attitude getting into the talks, or do you think that even if the talks said, well, sorry, but he needs to step down, he would still abide by it?
No, I think this is the right approach. The Americans in Iraq have forced Saddam to step down, and they went in full force, and things were not as rosy as it would have been.
Yes.
So now there's like, well, maybe he has supporters in his own country. Well, why don't we include them in the political arena? This is the democratic process that should accept all forces. So this is how they're shaping the new political move in Syria.
Yes. Well, what about now Iran? You've mentioned Iran being with good relations with Turkey. Now, how much of Iran's influence do you feel has on this Syrian conflict and within the region? Because there was a lot of talk about Iran trying to have a stronger influence within the whole region. How far is that true? How true is that? And really, is that something that is welcomed by the other Arab states, the Middle East countries and North Africa? Do you feel that this is a good thing, a bad thing, or still not yet to be known?
Well, from an economic point of view, I think Iran is a major power, and there is nothing wrong with trading with them. Iran have an interest in spreading its arms in the region for historical reasons, emotional reasons, whatever reasons. But then we're going to move to talk about the Shia presence in the region. Yes, they need to have an influence. That's Iran's agenda. They want to have an influence in the Gulf countries, in some North African countries, etc. So they support the Shia population in these countries. In case things don't go wrong, they will have supporters.
Yes.
But if now we're talking economic trade, when there is economic trade moving forward and everyone is benefiting, there is no reason to have a Shia uprising somewhere or to have Hezbollah supporters. These are all a curtain for economic deals that will happen later on.
Well, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan and Iraq are also expected to join the talks regarding the Syrian situation later on. How do you feel that would affect Iran's influence? Because not all of these countries have the strongest relationship with Iran. Do you feel that now within these talks there will be some sort of political conflict between Iran and some of these countries, such as Saudi Arabia, for instance?
Well, Saudi Arabia's biggest fear is Iran. And this is my opinion. In the near future, they will change their position because Iran will be welcomed into the international arena. So it's either... That's what George Bush said. It's either you're with us or against us. So Iran is needed in the international market now, and they need them politically. They need them. They need their oil. They need to open new markets. It's a virgin market. They have been having sanctions since the early 80s. So the entire world will move into Iran. So Saudi Arabia will have an interest to move in with the entire world. So I think they will change their position soon. Otherwise, we're prolonging the conflict.
Yes. Well, talking about Iran and really being accepted as within the international community as a major player. Now, the relationship with the U.S. administration always sort of dictates or really signals how the nature of the international community will be towards Iran or any other. Now, even though the nuclear program deal that was made by Iran and the US and its allies, still the US actually extended a 10-year economic sanctions on Iran a few weeks ago. Are we getting mixed signals from the US administration regarding its relationship with Iran, and how should that be received by the rest of the international community?
Well, the U.S. is buying itself some time until the situation is clear. So they have extended the sanctions, but at the same time they are retroactively trying to remove the sanctions. So it's just a political move to buy themselves some time, and at the same time don't appear to the entire world and their own people that, oh, suddenly we're friends with Iran. That needs some preparation, because they have been building a lot of hate towards Iran for the last 20, 30 years. So.
And what about Donald Trump becoming a president within a few days, actually? Do you think that because everyone was excited about new dynamics that he has, or his new ideas or strategies regarding combating extremism and terrorism and really the crises within the Middle East, it would be different than what Hillary Clinton was planning to do or what Obama has been doing? Do you feel that new strategies might change what's going on within the crises in the region right now?
Yes, I think Donald Trump will not be physically or apparently involved in the Middle East. The American people or the American public have been tired of getting America involved in the Middle East. They don't see a purpose for it, at least for the general public who is not political scientists. But so Donald Trump will try to appear as they're only supporting and advising and providing training and opening economic markets in a peaceful light. So a lot of people are expecting him to be involved in major wars in the region, but that's against my opinion.
Yes. What about now? Egypt is strong friends with Russia. It has been for quite some time, and we've seen right before Donald Trump becoming the president-elect. Now, the relationship between the US and Russia has been on ups and downs, and even after he was elected, we're still seeing a lot of reports regarding Russia behind manipulation of the presidential elections. Do you feel that there will be any sort of conflict of interest between Egypt, Russia, and the US?
Well, Egypt has historically been an ally for the US. Since the 1979 peace accords. For the time being, I think they will continue to be allies for the US, but they will lean towards benefiting the Russian government or the Russian state, giving them concessions, supporting them politically. But I don't believe that we will move out from the sphere of the American influence very quickly. We'll continue to broker the deal between both states. Also, Russia and America are really needed in the world. You need two major superpowers to make a balance. So, as a wise person, I would not really lean towards one side. I will always try to balance the situation.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, even the relationship between Egypt and Russia has gone through its own turbulences of late. However, it has gone now back to normal. Let's check out this report regarding the Egyptian-Russian relations, even after the plane crash that took place earlier in Sinai Peninsula, and we'll be right back.
Arab League's Assistant Secretary General Hussam Zaki reiterated that there are no tensions between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Speaking to reporters at the conference held at the Arab League's premises in Cairo, Zaki blamed the media over spreading that the two countries' relations are tense, saying that any disagreements had been exaggerated. He reiterated that he did not see the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Egypt had escalated to a tense level, adding that officials from both countries repeatedly insisted that relations are not affected. He noted that rumors have been stemmed from the media falsely announced news, stressing that the Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gheit exerts his utmost efforts to achieve same views on the various topics between the League's members. The conference addressed a number of issues in the region, as well as discussing the ongoing preparations of the upcoming Arab Summit, which is scheduled to take place in Jordan in March. Last month, Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri denied reports over turbulent relations between the two nations, describing the relationship as a special. Relations between Egypt and Saudi Arabia flourished in April following Saudi king's visit to Egypt, during which the two countries agreed on providing Egypt with 700,000 tons of refined oil products per month, for which Saudi Arabia was backing. In October, Saudi Arabia informed Egypt that shipments of oil products expected under a $23 billion aid deal have been halted indefinitely. The Saudi government has also placed an important ban on certain Egyptian products last month over alleged contamination. According to Egyptian official sources, court postponed viewing another appeal by the state against the previous court declaration that ruled on the annulment of the Egyptian-Saudi maritime demarcation agreement to the 12th of February. The appeal was filed by the agreement in August to stop the implementation of the administrative court ruling on the 21st of June, which annulled the agreement and asserted that the islands of Tiran and Sanafir are Egyptian. This appeal stated that the judiciary is not authorized to look into such agreements. It is the government's third appeal against the administrative court ruling. The first appeal was filed against the initial verdict a few hours after the administrative court had passed the verdict. The second appeal was filed in the Cairo Court of Urgent Matters to stop the verdict from being implemented. Last week, the Urgent Matters Court ruled in favor of stopping the implementation of the verdict, validating the demarcation agreement.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined here in the studio by Dr. محمد Abdalhalim, the political analyst. Dr. Abdalhalim, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, before we get into the Egyptian-Saudi relations, want to take a quick look on the Egyptian-Russian relations. Now, it has gone through its own ups and downs. Do you feel that now, after putting that whole plane crash incident behind us and them inviting us to the Astana talks regarding the Syrian crisis, do you feel now we're back on track on the relationship?
Yeah, what would seem to be quite obvious, actually, the fact that the Egyptian policy is in many ways trying to mend and correct its own path towards the right direction with the Russian administration, with the Russian authority, actually. And that would seem to be quite, from my own point of view, the only alternative left, actually. After the sort of the attacks and the menaces and the threatening voices on the part of the American administration, as represented by, Donald Trump, despite the fact that he seems to be at the very beginning very much propagating, the negation and the isolation of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I think, from my own point of view, the fact that this is the last trump card at his own disposal, the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood, came to be ended nowadays, and Hillary Clinton is just one part of the past that should be ended by no means now from the new American administration outlook. And that's why, actually, I wouldn't propagate, actually, a very optimistic look on the new American administration towards the policies and the diplomatic affairs of the Middle East concerning Egypt as well. The Russian side is very much implementing very good political ties and mending the sort of the relationship. As you might have said at the very beginning, that's the sort of the relationship that connects Egypt on the one hand and the Russian side on the other would pass through, certain stages of ups and downs every now and again. But nowadays, particularly during the sort of the victorious and the triumphant impact on the part of the governmental troops as represented by Bashar al-Assad in Aleppo, actually the Russian side and the Russian authority and the Russian implementation of a large number of very much successful situations in the Middle East came to the fore. And as such, I think that the Russian side is mending as its own tie with the Egyptian side, in much the same way that our own political leadership is playing very much successful roles towards mending and correcting the ties with the Russian authority being the final alternative to be left, actually, for us after the sort of the negation and after the sort of the far from being friendly attitude on the part of Donald Trump. A couple of weeks ago, there was a disclosure of some information on the part of the SP, the intelligence department on the part of the Russian organization about the attempt and hidden attempt and the taciturn agreement between America on the one hand and some other Arab country as much as Qatar to try to devastate the Egyptian armed forces, to try to you know, put tussles and struggles before the people to try to maximize a large number of, social problems in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt. And immediately after the sort of, the spying airplane that had been crashed in 2013, it seems to be quite obvious that the American administration, no matter how old or new, wouldn't be in favor of our own political distinguished authority and our own political way of ruling the things and of dealing with the issues of everyday life. That's why I would say that not only from an economic point of view, but also from social as well as military point of view, the Russian side is playing a very important, very much distinctive role, not only actually in Egypt, but also in the Middle East, being the final alternative left actually for most, if not all of the Arab countries actually in the area.
Well, Mr. Helwa, now, from the Russian relations, now, Egypt also had a very strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, its historical relationships. However, even after the 2011 revolution and for the years that follow within the political turbulences that Egypt has been going through, Saudi Arabia has been a very strong ally for Egypt, really granting Egypt a lot of financial support and financial aid. However, recently, a lot of reports and a lot of political analysts and observers thought that the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Egypt is not at its best and is witnessing a new low, even though the government, the Egyptian government, came out and said, no, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is still good. Now, there are many reasons for this relationship to maybe turn a little bit sour. One of which is the Iranian influence within the region and the conflicts there. How do you feel? Do you feel that Saudi Arabia has a reason to be a little bit upset or a little bit concerned about its relationship with Saudi Arabia, or do you feel that this is basically, these are false reports that are coming out from people who are trying to really find some sort of division within the relationship?
Well, I cannot really deny the reports because this is a political game. And Saudi Arabia going into Syria and going into Yemen needed a strong Arab country to support it, like Egypt, for example, maybe Algeria, someone with a very strong army. So the historical ties between Egypt and Saudi Arabia will continue despite our conflicts. We will always have conflicts, like a company. Partners do have conflicts, but we're still partners. So for the time being, I think things are normalized because the situation is not that tense. If it was tense, there's about 3 million Egyptians working in Saudi Arabia that would have been expelled, and we will witness a real tense situation. But this hasn't happened yet. So I think the situation is really normalized, and it's just political disagreements.
Yes. Well, talking about political disagreements, Dr. Abdulhalim, now a lot of people are really debating this issue here in Egypt, is the Tirana and Sanafir situation. Is it Egyptian? Is it Saudi? Is Egypt letting go of its land? No. Is it legal to actually, it was already a legal right for Saudi Arabia to actually claim responsibility and sovereignty over these islands. How do you read the situation? Should the people accept it as a fact? Should we oppose it as a fact? How do you evaluate the situation?
Yeah, right. I mean, part of the straining, actually, of the diplomatic relationships between Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Egypt on the other is the issue of Tirana and Sanafir, actually. I mean, but I think the political leadership was quite resourceful to a greater extent as to leave it, actually, to the parliament, actually, to decide its final decision about it, actually, to give it a final go, actually, and to say whether or not it is belonging, actually, to a Saudi territory, actually, or to Egyptian land. And this is the final destination, actually, on the part of our own political leadership. But concerning the sort of the straining of the ties and the diplomatic relationships between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, I think that this is part of the international conspiracy, actually, part of the hidden agenda and the part of the American administration. Every now and again, America is trying to put tussles and impediments, actually, within the sort of unification. Don't forget the fact that you know, I mean, our Mr. President Fattah Sisi was calling in the first instance for an Arab unified army, actually, that would put an end for all the aspirations and the dreams of the Israeli land, as much as for the Persian existence in the Gulf area. Attempting even now and again to change the sort of the name of the Gulf area and as belonging to the Arabs, actually, as a Persian area, just by way of revitalizing the old dream of the old empire of Persia. But this is, you know, I mean, unrealistic grounding. Again, part of the, you know, the struggle and the diplomatic trouble that does exist actually between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, on the other hand, is, you know, I mean, the abstaining from providing us with the oil on the part of Aramco as a company, despite the fact that we do have a sort of an agreement between the Egyptian side and the American and the Saudi on the other. The fact that they would seem to be quite, you know, I mean, forcing the Egyptian political leadership actually to go side by side with the American administration. And part and parcel of the tussle and part and parcel of the problem is the fact that Egypt and the representative of Egypt actually in the UN Security Council did vote at the end of the day in favor of the Syrian political leadership as represented by Bashar al-Assad. All these reasons and all these things would cooperate at the end of the day just by way of putting a sort of tussle and a sort of an impediment between the diplomatic relations between the Saudi Arabia kingdom on the one hand and Egypt. But I think we still do have and hold actually very good strong ties and very much historic relations that would go back actually to you know, I mean, more than 100 years ago. And I think a couple of days ago, a very diplomatic delegation on a highest level actually was trying to fill the gap between both parties actually, even though it would seem to be quite very much secretized. But I think at the end of the day, we are more than one nation, very much belonging to each other, and in the meantime holding very much firm ties that would bring both of each party actually to one unified goal at the end of the day. If you do understand the situation from a political point of view, that this is a hidden agenda actually on the part of the American administration to try to separate Egypt from all the other Arab countries, from Libya, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, and from Yemen as well, as it was represented by the Houthi rebels, and the Houthi militants actually.
Well, Mr. Helwa, now it seems that, well, Egypt will be joining the Astana talks later in the month, and subsequently Saudi Arabia, among other countries, will be joining in later on, at a later stage. Saudi Arabia seems to have a lot of baggage of political conflicts or maybe political disagreements or a little bit of differences with Egypt or other countries as well participating within the talks. Do you feel that this can affect the talks in any way, or is maybe Saudi Arabia along the other countries that will be participating at a later stage merely just some sort of a formality to actually have a unified agreement regarding solving the Syrian situation, and it wouldn't really have any bear any effect on the talks?
Well, Saudi Arabia want to have a concession in the new Syria. They have investments to propagate, they have companies to get involved, and they have to have a say in the political situation. So their involvement is really important. Saudi Arabia is a major country in the region, one of the richest countries in the region. So they have to be involved, they want to be involved, and they have a say. They will make a lot of leverage to the talks.
Do you feel that the baggage that they have, all the conflicts, all the disagreements that they have with other countries participating in the talks would have any effect?
No. It's an isolated talks.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdulhalim, if we are looking as well on the Egyptian foreign relations as a file, now Egypt has gone through great lengths to strengthen its relationship with the African states, and one file seems to always pop up in any discussion is the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam affecting Egypt's share of the Nile water, having Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt really the three parties involved in the situation. We always say, no, they're not going to go through it, and yes, they are going through it. Now we're waiting for the verdicts of the French consultancy firms, and we have to all abide by it. It doesn't seem that we found some sort of resolve or conclusion for this issue that has been going on for years. How do you assess Egypt's strategy dealing with this file?
Right. It's a very crucial issue, actually. The Renaissance Dam is one of the most crucial diplomatic affairs, actually, being laid so wide open for discussion now. You know, I mean, some parties would assist, actually, the interference on the part of political and diplomatic affairs just by way of, you know, I mean, finding solutions at the end of the day. Some others are very much concerned with how to put an end, actually, for the whole situation right from the very beginning by all possible means at our own disposal. I would go for the first, not for the second, actually. And so far as, actually, now the dam has been built, has been erected, and the source of the water had been provided, actually. And everything would seem to be quite well prepared, actually, for the effusion of water. That's why Egypt and Sudan, being part and parcel of the effusion countries, they would have one destiny, one final destination, which is sharing, actually, the final and the ultimate solution at the end of the day. The fact that the president today of South Sudan, actually, was visiting Egypt, and I think that the diplomatic affairs and the diplomatic relations are to be very much strengthened nowadays, just by way of, you know, I mean, coping the situation that had been presented, you know, a couple of weeks ago when a high delegation on the part of the Saudi Kingdom would visit Ethiopia just by way of fortifying the idea and the assistance of, you know, I mean, erecting the Renaissance Dam, followed by Qatar a couple of days ago. That's why I think the situation would seem to be very much crucial. And the interference on our own political leadership should be very much based on diplomatic affairs, on missions, on machineries, on what you might call the diplomatic solutions, actually. So long as everything has been said and done, and so far as the sort of the dam has been established and erected, I think other diplomatic affairs that would put an end for the sort of the perpetual struggle, the struggle that has been initiated, actually, since 40 years ago, actually.
Yes. Well, Mr. Helwa, Egypt is also not just involved in the Syrian crisis, but it also is hosting talks to solve the Libyan crisis. Now, it is Egypt's next-door neighbor, and it poses a big concern for Egypt's security. Also, there are a lot of Daesh extremists there. Now, what can Egypt offer? How can Egypt solve or have a major say in solving the situation in Libya? Is it as advanced as everyone is expecting the Syrian situation is? Is it still at an early stage? How do you feel Egypt should tackle this file?
It's a very complex situation in Libya because of the extreme number of militias. Regardless of having radical Islamists there, but there are too many militias there to control the political will. So let's say at the top level, the political will is to have stability. The militias will have another agenda, which is very not in line with stability. We have a very big problem right now with the central bank of Libya providing salaries for everyone in Libya, including Daesh. So how can Egypt get involved in this? I think Egypt have a lot of influence on the eastern part of Libya, and historically and currently, 1 out of 3 Libyans has an Egyptian mother. So we can softly try to control the situation in the east. We can also control the borders. We have very porous borders, which allow extremists to come in and out very easily, and you can see that from the smuggling routes. So if we control the borders and have a soft political say for the eastern provinces, which is up to, all the way to Benghazi, there might be some stability in the east of Libya. The west have a different culture, and I'm not sure how well we are able to control the situation in the west of Libya. I think they're more lenient toward the Tunisians, which are our allies as well, and maybe they're doing their part of that.
Yes. Well, do you feel that Egypt has, I mean, as you say, Egypt has a strong influence within the eastern side of Libya. But do you think that would be enough to actually have a strong say or a strong influence in solving the Libyan crisis, or do you feel that we need other countries to participate with such talks? Do you feel that maybe other countries such as Tunisia, maybe other countries such as Russia that have proved that they have a strong say in what happens in Syria, maybe they would be influential as well in Libya?
Well, it depends on what the Libyans want. If they're inviting the Egyptians will go in. For the time being, the Libyans are divided towards the British, the French, the Russians, the Americans, the Egyptians. So every faction or a group of militias are inviting some of these countries to try to stabilize the country. As we speak right now, there are forces from Russia and Syria, Russia and France, and the British special forces are in eastern Libya trying to control the situation. So if we are invited, I'm sure we will support.
Yes.
So it all depends on the Libyan will. What do they want?
Yes.
Egypt is a natural ally for Libya. They feel more comfortable talking to us.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdalhalim, we keep talking about these crises within these states, and we talk about all these different players. But what about the role that will be played by the U.S. administration? Everyone made a big deal of the different strategies that President-elect Donald Trump will take in dealing with these situations in the Middle East and fighting extremism. How do you see now, after a few days after Trump actually assumes the office in the administration, how do you feel they would fit themselves in within all these crises, the Syrian one, the Libyan one, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that the United States of America, a country of constitutions and institutions, actually, no matter how the president may be, he or she. If you look for the presidential American elections during the course of the previous 40 years, you will find actually that the same strategy is being channeled, is being directed within one same route, here, there, and everywhere, that would never, ever be changed, which is the establishment and the fortifying of, between two inverted commas, our dear friend Israel, which is part and parcel of the existence of the American daily life, actually. And I wouldn't say that's Donald Trump's way of dealing with the Middle East people or the Middle East area actually would undergo some slight change. He would seem to be quite going and coping with the self-service that had been put before by the IPAC, by the lobby, the Jewish lobby, and by those, titanic groups, actually, that would seem to be quite doing with the strategists of the Middle East, like puppets, like marionettes. The fact that he would never, ever be changed in the due course of time, he will be concentrating and very much, propagating the establishment of the Jewish state. A couple of weeks ago, he was one of, the ardent believers of changing the capital of Jerusalem to be actually the major capital of the land of Israel. And in the meantime, he would like to change the place of the embassy of the United States of America to be not in Tel Aviv, but actually to be there in Jerusalem. This is a clear testimony to the fact that he has got one-sided attitude, which is the establishment, the fortification of the Jewish state here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
He would seem to be quite insisting on the same principles that had been laid down since 40 years ago.
Yes. Well, Mr. Helwa, speaking of Israel now, we've mentioned earlier Iran's influence within the region and how it would be welcomed or not so welcomed. If you're basing it on economic interests, it would be welcomed. How do you feel Israel would react to such a growing influence by Iran within the region?
Well, of course, it's a scary situation for them because Iran has historically been vocal about their anger towards Israel, hate towards Israel. So this is something that they have to consider, how we're going to deal with Iran when they're included in the game. So for the time being, I believe that Israel is trying to broker deals with other Arab countries to be its ally in case there is a disagreement with Iran. So there are talks with Saudi Arabia now, there are talks with Egypt, talks with Libya, there are talks with the Jordanians, the Syrians. They're involved and building a lot of allies. And it's all based on economic interests.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely a lot of political developments taking place nowadays. Egypt will be joining the Astana talks later in the month. Also, Egypt is talking to find a common solution for the Syrian crisis, and Egypt is also hosting the talks regarding the Libyan situation here in Cairo. We're going to be following up all of these developments and all of these talks here on Al International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. محمد Abdalhalim, the political analyst. I'd also like to thank very much Dr. Sharif Al-Helwa, the political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Al International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.